The little girl's body was burning with fever when he called her for the third time. No answer. He looked down at his daughter lying weakly against his chest, her tiny hands trembling slightly beneath the blanket. "Daddy," she whispered softly. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. Painfully small. "I want Mommy." Those 4 words shattered him more than the fever itself. He kissed her forehead gently, trying not to let panic show on his face. "She'll answer soon, sweetheart," he whispered. But deep down, he was no longer sure. Rain hit the apartment windows hard that night while he paced nervously through the living room holding his daughter in his arms. The thermometer still showed a dangerously high temperature, 103.8. His hands tightened slightly. Fear was slowly turning into anger. Not because she wasn't home, because she knew their daughter was sick. And still, she kept ignoring his calls. Finally, his phone lit up again. Her name appeared on the screen. Relief rushed through him instantly as he answered quickly. "Where are you?" he asked breathlessly. "She keeps asking for you. Her fever's getting worse." "I told you I'm busy tonight," she interrupted coldly. Loud music echoed behind her. Laughter too. His chest tightened immediately. "You're still out?" he asked quietly. A pause followed. Then another voice appeared faintly in the background. Male. Familiar. His stomach dropped instantly. It was him. Her ex. The same man she promised she stopped talking to months ago. "She just needs medicine," she said impatiently. "Stop overreacting." Overreacting. He looked down at their daughter shaking weakly in his arms while struggling to stay awake. And suddenly, something inside him cracked. "She's asking for her mother," he whispered. For the first time, his voice sounded broken. Silence followed briefly on the other end. Then came the words he would never forget. "I'll call later." The line disconnected. Just like that. No goodbye. No concern. Nothing. For a few seconds, he simply stared at the dark phone screen. Unable to move. Unable to process what had just happened. His daughter pulled weakly at his sleeve. "Did Mommy come?" she asked softly. He forced a smile that nearly destroyed him. "Not yet, sweetheart." The little girl nodded slowly before closing her tired eyes again against his chest. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. He was no longer fighting to save a marriage. He was trying to protect his daughter from the pain of realizing her own mother stopped choosing them. Hours later, inside the hospital waiting room, exhaustion covered his face. His daughter finally slept quietly beside him after receiving treatment. Machines beeped softly around the room while rain continued pouring outside. Everything felt cold. Heavy. Unreal. Then his phone vibrated again. A single message from her. "Can you stop making drama for one night?" He stared at those words silently, over and over again, until the sadness slowly disappeared from his face, replacing itself with something far more dangerous. Disappointment. Quiet. Permanent disappointment. Slowly, he opened his phone camera, turned it toward himself and his sleeping daughter, and pressed record. Completely unaware. That one video was about to become the biggest regret of her entire life. The hospital room was silent except for the soft sound of machines beside the bed. Dim white lights reflected against the walls while rain continued tapping against the windows outside. Their daughter finally slept peacefully after hours of struggling with fever. But he couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice again. "I'll call later." As if their daughter's pain was an inconvenience. As if he was the problem for asking her to come home. Slowly, he looked down at the little girl sleeping beside him. Her cheeks were still pale. Her tiny fingers weakly wrapped around the edge of the blanket. And suddenly, the sadness inside him transformed into something heavier. Not anger. Clarity. Painful clarity. He picked up his phone again. Opened the camera. For a moment, he hesitated. Not because he wanted revenge. Because part of him still hoped she would realize her mistake on her own. But another part. The exhausted father sitting alone in a hospital at 2 a.m. needed her to finally see what she had chosen over. So quietly. He pressed record. The camera captured the hospital room first. Then their daughter sleeping weakly in the bed. Then finally him. Tired eyes. Wet hair from the rain. A face completely drained from fear and disappointment. He stayed silent for a few seconds before speaking softly. She kept asking for you tonight. His voice cracked slightly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. She thought you'd come if I called enough times. He looked down briefly at his daughter before continuing. I didn't know what to tell her anymore. The room felt even quieter now. Painfully quiet. I'm not recording this to fight with you, he whispered. I just need you to understand this moment someday. His eyes slowly filled with emotion. Because one day she's going to remember who stayed beside her hospital bed tonight. A long pause followed. Then came the sentence that hurt most. And I'm scared she'll also remember who didn't. He stopped recording immediately after that. No yelling. No insults. No dramatic ending. Just truth. Raw truth. For several minutes, he stared silently at the saved video on his screen. Then finally, he sent it to her. No extra message attached. Because the video itself said enough. Across the city, loud music still filled the luxury rooftop restaurant where she sat laughing beside her ex. Her phone vibrated against the table. At first, she ignored it. But when she saw his name again, annoyance crossed her face instantly. What now? She muttered quietly. Her ex glanced at her curiously. You okay? She forced a smile. Yeah. Just family drama. Family drama. The words left her mouth so casually. So carelessly. Without realizing that those two words were about to destroy everything she once had. Finally, she opened the video. Still expecting exaggeration. Still believing he was overreacting. But the moment the hospital room appeared on her screen, her smile disappeared instantly. And for the first time that night, fear entered her eyes. The noise around her disappeared instantly. The music. The conversations. The city lights glowing behind the rooftop restaurant. None of it mattered anymore. Her eyes stayed frozen on the phone screen while the video continued playing in her trembling hands. She kept asking for you tonight. His exhausted voice echoed softly through the speakers. And suddenly, everything felt wrong. Painfully wrong. She stared at the hospital bed. At their daughter sleeping weakly beneath the blanket. At the pale face she should have noticed hours ago. Her breathing became uneven immediately. Because this wasn't drama. This wasn't exaggeration. This was real. And she wasn't there. Across the table, her ex noticed the sudden change in her expression. What happened? He asked quietly. But she barely heard him. Her attention stayed locked on the screen. Especially when she heard the final sentence. I'm scared she'll remember who didn't. The words hit like a knife directly into her chest. Sharp. Slow. Impossible to ignore. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. Not emotional tears from guilt alone. Panic. Real panic. Because for the first time that night, she saw herself through someone else's eyes. Not as a stressed mother. Not as someone needing one night away. But as a woman who ignored her sick daughter for another man. And somehow, that truth terrified her. She stood up so quickly the chair nearly fell backward. I have to go, she whispered. Her ex frowned in confusion. Wait, what happened? My daughter's in the hospital. Those words sounded unreal even to her. Because until now, she hadn't fully accepted it emotionally. Not really. Not until she saw the hospital room with her own eyes. Not until she heard the pain in his voice. Rain poured heavily outside as she rushed toward the elevator, dialing his number repeatedly. Once. Twice. 5 times. No answer. Panic tightened around her chest with every unanswered call. The elevator doors finally opened into the lobby, and she hurried outside into the cold rain without thinking. Her hands trembled while trying to unlock her car. Because suddenly, every moment from earlier replayed brutally in her mind. Him begging her to answer. Their daughter asking for her mother. And her saying, stop overreacting. A broken sound escaped her throat. Because now she understood something horrifying. While her daughter was lying in a hospital bed, she had been sitting beside another man calling it family drama. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Red lights. Traffic. Rain-covered windows. Every second tortured her now. Not because she feared an argument. Because she feared she was already too late. Finally, She reached the hospital parking lot and ran inside desperately. Her wet footsteps echoed through the hallway while nurses looked at her curiously. Room 214. Her eyes found the number immediately. But the moment she reached the door, she froze. Inside the room, their daughter slept peacefully beside him. And for the first time in years, he didn't look at her with love when she entered. He looked at her with disappointment. Deep, quiet, permanent disappointment. And somehow, that hurt more than anger ever could. The hospital room felt colder the moment she stepped inside. Not because of the air. Because of him. He sat beside the bed quietly, one hand resting near their daughter while the soft hospital light cast shadows across his exhausted face. For a second, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the heart monitor beside the bed. Steady, slow, painfully calm. She swallowed hard before stepping closer. "How is she?" she asked softly. Her voice barely sounded like her own. "She's stable now," he replied quietly. No warmth. No comfort. Just information. That hurt immediately. Because he used to reassure her first. Even during arguments. Even during stressful nights. But now, something inside him felt distant. Like he was emotionally pulling away right in front of her. She looked toward their daughter sleeping weakly beneath the blanket. Tears instantly filled her eyes again. "I came as fast as I could," she whispered. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Because even she knew how meaningless they sounded now. He let out a quiet breath before finally looking at her directly. "And if I never sent the video?" he asked calmly. Her chest tightened instantly. Because she had no answer. None. The silence between them said enough. He stood up slowly from the chair beside the bed. Exhaustion covered every movement. Not just physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that builds after feeling abandoned too many times. "She asked for you all night," he said quietly. His voice remained calm. But somehow that made it worse. She kept thinking her mom would walk through the door. Each sentence landed painfully inside her chest. I didn't know what to tell her anymore. Tears rolled down her face silently now. "I'm sorry," she whispered desperately. "I know I messed up." He nodded slightly. "Yes," he replied softly. Just one word. But the lack of emotion behind it terrified her. Because anger still carries attachment. Disappointment feels colder. Further away. She stepped closer carefully. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. But the moment she said it, she realized how weak that sounded too. Because intentions no longer mattered. Choices did. And tonight, she chose someone else over her own family. Even if only emotionally. For several seconds, he stayed silent. Then finally, "Do you know what hurt most?" he asked quietly. She looked at him through tears. "I called because I was scared," he continued. "Not because I wanted to control you." That sentence shattered something inside her completely. Because now she finally understood what he felt earlier that night. Not jealousy. Not possessiveness. Fear. Fear for their daughter. Fear of handling everything alone. And she abandoned him in that moment. The room became silent again. Heavy silence. The kind that appears when damage has already been done. Then suddenly, their daughter stirred weakly beneath the blanket. Small sleepy eyes slowly opened. "Mommy," she whispered softly. Instantly, she rushed toward the bed and grabbed her tiny hand carefully. "I'm here, baby," she said through tears. The little girl smiled weakly. But then, her next words quietly shattered the entire room. "I thought you weren't coming. I thought you weren't coming." The little girl's weak voice echoed softly through the hospital room. Simple words. Innocent words. But they hit harder than anything else that night. Her breath caught instantly as tears rolled down her face again. Because children don't know how to hide pain politely. They speak honestly. And that honesty destroyed her. "No, sweetheart," she whispered quickly, squeezing her daughter's tiny hand gently. "Mommy's here now." The little girl gave a small tired nod before slowly closing her eyes again. Exhaustion pulled her back to sleep within seconds. But for the adults standing in that room, sleep suddenly felt impossible. Silence filled the space once more. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Permanent. She carefully wiped her face before finally turning toward him again. "I know saying sorry isn't enough," she whispered. He stayed quiet. Not because he wanted to punish her. Because deep down, he genuinely didn't know what else was left to say anymore. That scared her more than shouting ever could. "I made a mistake," she continued desperately. "A terrible mistake." He looked at her for a long moment before answering softly. "It wasn't just tonight." Her chest tightened instantly, because she knew exactly what he meant. Tonight wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. The moment years of emotional distance finally became impossible to ignore. "You stopped being here long before the hospital," he said quietly. No anger. No dramatic accusations. Just truth. Painfully calm truth. "You've been physically around us," he continued. "But emotionally, you were somewhere else." Tears blurred her vision again, because every word felt true. Late-night phone calls she hid. Conversations with her ex she minimized. Moments where she ignored her family emotionally while pretending everything was fine. She never crossed certain lines physically. But emotionally? Maybe she already had. And now, she was finally seeing the damage clearly. "I never meant to replace you," she whispered brokenly. "That's not what happened." He nodded slightly. "I know." That surprised her. But then he added quietly, "Sometimes people don't realize they're leaving emotionally until someone finally stops chasing them." The sentence settled heavily inside her chest. Because suddenly, the video made even more sense now. It wasn't revenge. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who felt abandoned while still standing beside the person they loved. She sat down slowly beside the hospital bed, staring at her sleeping daughter. Tiny fingers. Warm forehead. Peaceful breathing. And a terrifying thought suddenly entered her mind. What if this night became the memory that changed everything forever? Children remember pain differently. Especially disappointment. Especially absence. Hours passed quietly inside the room. Neither of them argued anymore. There was nothing left to yell about. Only damage left to face. Then sometime near sunrise, he finally stood up from the chair. "I'm going to grab coffee," he said quietly. As he walked toward the door, she looked up quickly. "Are you leaving?" she asked softly. He paused briefly, then answered without turning around. "No." But somehow, the distance in his voice made her realize something heartbreaking. Even though he was still standing there physically, part of him already had. The hospital cafeteria was almost empty at sunrise. Cold white lights reflected against quiet tables while exhausted nurses moved silently through the halls nearby. He stood near the coffee machine staring at nothing. One hand rested against the counter while the other held his phone loosely. For the first time all night, everything finally felt still. And somehow that silence made the pain clearer. Because now that the panic about his daughter had settled, he could finally feel what the night truly did to him. Something inside him no longer felt safe with her. That realization hurt deeply. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a slow emotional fracture finally becoming impossible to ignore. Back upstairs, she sat beside their daughter's hospital bed watching the sunrise through the window. But her thoughts stayed trapped inside the same terrifying question. What if he never forgives me? Hours earlier, she believed the real danger was losing an argument. Now she understood the truth. The real danger was losing trust. And trust breaks silently. Her phone buzzed softly beside her. She looked down immediately. Her ex. Again. Just seeing his name now filled her with disgust. Not because he forced her into anything. Because she allowed him emotional space that belonged to her family. Without hesitation, she opened the conversation and deleted everything. Messages. Photos. Call history. Gone. Then she blocked the number completely. But even after doing it, the guilt remained. Because deleting something after the damage is done doesn't erase the damage itself. A few minutes later, he returned quietly holding 2 cups of coffee. She stood up immediately. "I blocked him," she said quickly. The words rushed out desperately, as if they could somehow repair everything overnight. He looked at her calmly, then placed the coffee on the table beside her. "Okay," he replied softly. That was it. No relief. No satisfaction. No emotional reaction. And somehow, That terrified her even more, because once someone stops reacting emotionally, it often means they're already pulling away inside. I mean it, she continued nervously. I'm done with all of that. He nodded slightly again, but his eyes stayed tired. You should have been done before tonight, he answered quietly. The truth in his voice crushed her instantly. Because he was right. The problem wasn't the ex anymore. The problem was how long she ignored the emotional distance growing inside her own home. Their daughter stirred weakly again beneath the blanket. Both of them immediately looked toward her. And for one brief moment, everything felt normal again. Just two worried parents beside their child. But the illusion disappeared quickly. Because emotional wounds don't heal as fast as fevers do. Later that afternoon, the doctor finally entered the room with good news. She's doing much better, he said with a small smile. Relief flooded through both of them instantly. Their daughter would recover. But as she looked toward him, she realized something painful. Their relationship might not. That night, after their daughter fell asleep again, she quietly reached for his hand beside the bed. A small gesture. Simple. Familiar. But this time, instead of holding it naturally like he always used to, he hesitated. That tiny hesitation lasted less than a second. But she felt it completely. Because when someone you love begins doubting your touch, everything changes. His eyes briefly dropped toward her hand resting near his. Then, slowly, he pulled his hand back. Not aggressively. Not cruelly. Just carefully. Like someone protecting a wound that still hurt. And somehow, that gentle distance shattered her more than anger ever could. Her chest tightened painfully as she lowered her hand again. The silence between them suddenly felt unbearable. I know you're hurt, she whispered softly. He stared quietly toward the sleeping child beside them before answering. It's more than hurt. Those words instantly made her stomach sink. Because deep down, she already knew. Hurt fades. But emotional trust? That's harder to rebuild. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hospital room remained dim and quiet, while rain softly tapped against the windows again outside. Then, finally, he let out a slow breath. I kept trying to convince myself nothing was wrong, he admitted quietly. I kept believing you'd eventually come back emotionally. Every word landed heavily inside her chest. But somewhere along the way, he continued softly, I started feeling alone even when you were sitting next to me. Tears filled her eyes instantly again. Because she remembered those moments now. The distracted conversations. The emotional distance. The nights she stopped noticing how exhausted he looked trying to hold everything together. And worst of all, the way she always assumed he would continue loving her no matter how little emotional reassurance she gave back. I never wanted you to feel alone, she whispered brokenly. He nodded slightly. I know. Again. No anger. Just exhaustion. That calm disappointment was slowly destroying her. Because she could feel him emotionally slipping further away with every quiet sentence. She stood up suddenly and walked toward the window, wiping tears from her face. The city lights outside blurred through the rain-covered glass. I hate myself for tonight, she admitted softly. Behind her, his voice remained calm. Tonight didn't create the problem. That truth hit immediately. Because once again, he was right. The hospital only exposed what had already been breaking quietly for months. She turned back toward him slowly. Do you still love me? She asked. The question escaped before fear could stop it. For several seconds. He said nothing. And those seconds terrified her more than any answer could. Finally, he looked at her. Yes, he admitted quietly. Relief almost reached her chest. Until he continued. But love stops feeling safe when someone keeps making you question your place in their life. Her breathing became uneven instantly. Because now she understood the real damage. He still loved her. But he no longer trusted that love enough to feel secure inside it. And without emotional safety, even love begins falling apart. She slowly walked back toward the hospital bed and sat beside their daughter again. Small machines beeped softly nearby while exhaustion filled the room. Then quietly, almost like speaking to himself, he whispered something she would remember for the rest of her life. The saddest part is... He paused briefly. I think I started preparing myself to lose you long before tonight happened. The hospital lights dimmed slightly as night returned. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind felt heavier. She sat beside their daughter's bed, gently brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. Every small breath her child took felt like a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. And yet, even with relief in her heart, something else hurt more. The distance between them. Because he wasn't sitting beside her anymore the same way he used to. He was there, but not emotionally close. Not anymore. He stood near the window, staring at the dark city beyond the glass. Hands in his pockets. Shoulders heavy. Like someone carrying a weight he no longer knew how to put down. She watched him for a long time before speaking. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked softly. The question didn't come out confidently. It came out like fear. Raw fear. He didn't answer immediately. That silence alone made her chest tighten again. Finally, he turned slightly. "I don't know," he said honestly. No lies. No false hope. Just truth. And that truth hurt more than anything she had heard that night. Because once again, she realized she couldn't fix this with words alone. Not anymore. She stood up slowly and walked toward him. "I know I failed you," she whispered. Her voice shook slightly. "But I don't want to lose this family." He looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger. Not with love either. Something in between. Something uncertain. "Losing a family doesn't happen in one night," he said quietly. "It happens when someone starts feeling alone inside it for too long." Her eyes filled again instantly. Because she understood now. That wasn't just about tonight. It was about everything before tonight. Every ignored call. Every distracted conversation. Every moment she assumed he would always be there no matter how little she emotionally showed up. She slowly stepped closer again. "Tell me what I need to do," she said softly. "Please." This time her voice wasn't demanding. It was desperate. He looked at her carefully. Then sighed. "You can't fix it instantly," he replied. "That's the part people always misunderstand." Her chest tightened. Because she wanted a solution. A clear path. Something she could do immediately to make things right. But love doesn't repair itself on command. Back at the bed, their daughter stirred slightly in her sleep again. Both of them immediately turned toward her. And for a moment, they stood there like they used to. Side by side. Watching over their child. But the emotional gap between them was still there. Invisible. But real. After a long silence, she finally spoke again. "I'll earn your trust back," she said firmly. Not loudly, but with conviction. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he nodded slightly. Not acceptance. Not rejection. Just acknowledgement. Because some promises don't heal instantly. They only begin the long process of rebuilding what was lost. Later that night, as she lay beside their daughter's bed, she looked at him one last time. He had fallen asleep in the chair near the window. Tired. Completely drained. And for the first time, she realized something painful. He didn't look like a man waiting for a relationship anymore. He looked like someone slowly learning how to live without it. And that thought terrified her more than anything else that night. Morning sunlight slowly entered the hospital room through the curtains. Soft. Quiet. Almost peaceful. But nothing about them felt peaceful anymore. She barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the same things over and over again. Her daughter asking for her. Him begging her to answer the phone. And the cold way she said, "Stop making drama for one night." Now those words haunted her like a punishment she couldn't escape. Across the room, he was already awake. Sitting silently beside the window with a cup of untouched coffee in his hands. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. Exhaustion surrounded him completely. But what scared her most was how calm he looked now. Not angry. Not emotional. Just distant. Like someone slowly disconnecting himself to survive the pain. Their daughter finally woke up around sunrise. A small sleepy smile appeared on her face the moment she saw both of them nearby. "Mommy stayed?" she asked softly. Her chest tightened instantly. "Yes, baby," she whispered gently, brushing hair away from her daughter's forehead. "Mommy stayed." The little girl smiled weakly before looking toward him too. For one brief moment. The room almost felt normal again, like a real family. But underneath that fragile moment, the damage still remained. Later that afternoon, the doctor returned with good news. She can go home tomorrow if the fever doesn't return. Relief filled the room instantly. Her eyes closed briefly in gratitude. But when she looked toward him, his reaction stayed small, quiet, like someone too emotionally drained to fully feel relief anymore. And suddenly, she realized something terrifying. He wasn't just tired from the hospital. He was tired from carrying the relationship for too long. After the doctor left, silence filled the room again. Then finally, he spoke quietly without looking at her. "I think we need time apart." Her entire body froze instantly. The words hit harder than she expected. Because deep down, she feared this moment was coming. Still, hearing it out loud shattered something inside her. "What?" she whispered. He finally looked at her. Calm eyes. Tired eyes. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay after last night." Tears instantly filled her vision again. "But I said I'll fix this," she whispered desperately. "I know," he replied softly. "And maybe one day you will." That sentence destroyed her, because it sounded like goodbye disguised as kindness. She stepped closer quickly. "Please don't do this," she whispered through tears. "We can work through this." He closed his eyes briefly before answering. "I don't even know who I am inside this relationship anymore." The honesty in his voice terrified her, because this wasn't punishment. This wasn't manipulation. This was someone emotionally breaking after trying too hard for too long. Their daughter slept peacefully between them while silence slowly filled the room again. And for the first time, she realized something painful. Love alone doesn't save relationships. Not when trust weakens. Not when emotional loneliness grows quietly for too long. And not when someone finally becomes too exhausted to keep fighting for both people alone. The divorce happened quietly. No screaming. No dramatic courtroom fights. Just signatures. Silence. And two people who once loved each other too much slowly becoming strangers. In the beginning, she still believed time would fix everything. That eventually he would forgive her. That one terrible night couldn't possibly destroy an entire family forever. But she underestimated something dangerous. People can survive heartbreak. What they struggle to survive is emotional exhaustion. And by the time she realized how deeply she had broken him, he was already gone emotionally. Years passed. Their daughter grew older. Smarter. Kinder. But also quieter around her mother. Not disrespectful. Just distant. The kind of distance created when a child remembers who truly stayed during the moments that mattered most. And somehow, that hurt even more than losing the marriage. Meanwhile, he rebuilt his life slowly. Not perfectly. Not easily. But peacefully. The exhaustion that once lived in his eyes eventually disappeared. For the first time in years, he looked emotionally free. And every time she saw that change from a distance, the guilt inside her grew heavier. Because deep down, she knew exactly why he changed. He stopped begging to be emotionally chosen, and finally chose himself instead. 20 years later, on a cold rainy evening, she sat alone inside a quiet apartment. Older now, grey beginning to touch her hair. Silence surrounding her once again. But unlike years ago, there were no more chances left to fix things. Only memories. Painful memories. Her phone rested in her trembling hands. On the screen, the same old video. The hospital room. Their daughter sleeping weakly in bed. And his exhausted voice saying, "I'm scared she'll remember who didn't." Even after 20 years, those words still shattered her completely. Tears rolled down her face as she replayed the video again. And again. And again. Not because she forgot the mistake. Because she never escaped it. She finally understood something too late. That night was never about one phone call. Or one argument. It was about making the people who loved you feel emotionally abandoned when they needed you most. And sometimes, one selfish moment creates a lifetime of regret. Near the window sat an old framed family photo. 3 smiling faces frozen in happier times. Before emotional distance destroyed everything quietly. Before one unanswered call changed their entire future. She stared at the picture for a long time before whispering softly into the empty apartment. I should have answered the phone. But the silence gave no response, because some apologies arrived decades too late, and some regrets stay with you forever.